A lone figure stood at the edge of the schoolyard, prayer beads hidden in trembling fingers. Min-ho Park adjusted his new uniform for the 7th time that morning, the unfamiliar weight of the blue trousers and crisp white shirt making him feel like an imposter. The red tie around his neck seemed to tighten with each passing moment as he watched the other students gather in their comfortable circles, laughing and talking with the ease of those who belonged. The bell would ring in exactly 3 minutes, and Min-ho would have to walk through those doors as the new transfer student, the Buddhist boy at St. Augustine's Academy. His mother had assured him it would be fine. "Education is education," she had said with practical certainty while ironing his uniform the night before. "Your father's new position is important, and St. Augustine's is the best school in the district." What she didn't say, but Min-ho understood perfectly well, was that they had little choice. His father's job transfer from South Korea to this small American town meant compromises, and this was one of them. Min-ho took a deep breath and squeezed the prayer beads once more before slipping them into his pocket. The small jade beads had been a gift from his grandfather, who had pressed them into Min-ho's palm before they left Seoul. "Remember who you are," the old man had said, his weathered face solemn. "Different paths can lead to the same mountain peak." The bell rang, its sharp sound cutting through Min-ho's thoughts. He squared his shoulders and walked toward the entrance, keeping his eyes fixed on the doors ahead. He could feel gazes following him, the new student, the different one, but he maintained his composure, remembering his father's words about dignity in unfamiliar places. The first 3 classes passed in a blur of introductions and sidelong glances. Teachers were polite but distant, and students whispered behind cupped hands whenever he spoke. His accent, though slight, might as well have been a flashing sign above his head that read, "Foreigner." During world history, he had correctly answered a question about the ancient Silk Road, which earned him a nod from Mr. Isaacs, but also intensified the whispers. By lunchtime, Min-ho had memorized the layout of the school, but had yet to exchange more than perfunctory greetings with any of his classmates. He carried his tray to an empty table in the corner of the cafeteria, arranged his food methodically, and began to eat, pretending to be absorbed in a book while actually observing the social dynamics around him. "That seat's taken." Min-ho looked up to see a tall boy with sandy hair and a prefect badge standing over him. Behind him stood 3 other boys, all wearing identical expressions of barely concealed hostility. "I apologize," Min-ho said, gathering his things. "I did not realize." "Yeah, well, now you do," said the tall boy. His name tag read David Campbell, a senior by the look of it. "This is senior territory. You should go sit with the other international students." He gestured vaguely toward a table near the kitchen where 2 Hispanic students and an Indian girl sat. Min-ho nodded and moved without argument, feeling the heat of embarrassment on the back of his neck. As he settled at the new table, the other international students gave him brief, sympathetic smiles, but returned to their own conversations. He was an outsider even among outsiders. The afternoon brought physical education, where teams were chosen for basketball. Min-ho stood against the wall as names were called, unsurprised when he was among the last selected. What did surprise him was the teacher, a tall, broad-shouldered man introduced as Coach Matthews, who seemed to watch Min-ho with unusual intensity throughout the class. "Park!" Coach Matthews called as Min-ho was heading to the locker room after class. "A word." Min-ho approached cautiously, wondering if he had violated some unwritten rule. "You've got good form," the coach said, bouncing a basketball absently. "Ever play on a team?" "Yes, sir. In Seoul, I was on my school team for 3 years." Coach Matthews nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "We have practice tomorrow after school. You should come." It wasn't quite an invitation, but it wasn't a command either. Min-ho bowed slightly, a habit he hadn't shaken. "Thank you for the opportunity. I will be there." The coach's eyes crinkled slightly at the bow, but he didn't comment on it. 3:30 sharp, don't be late." "Deal." As Minho walked home that afternoon, his prayer beads clicked softly in his pocket with each step. The familiar sound was comforting, a reminder of who he was and where he came from. Perhaps basketball would be a way to bridge the gap, to find common ground with his new classmates. Perhaps. The next morning, Minho arrived early, hoping to settle into his routine without drawing attention. He was surprised to find another early arrival, a slightly built boy with glasses who was setting up chemistry equipment in the lab adjacent to Minho's homeroom. "Good morning," Minho said cautiously. The boy looked up, startled. "Oh, good morning. You're the new student, right? I'm Elijah Wells." He extended a hand, then seemed to think better of it and gave an awkward wave instead. Minho smiled. "Minho Park, it is nice to meet you, Elijah." "You too. Are you interested in chemistry? I'm setting up for the science club meeting after school. I enjoy science, yes, but I have basketball practice today." Elijah's eyebrows rose. "Really? With Coach Matthews? That's, unexpected." "Why is that unexpected?" Elijah adjusted his glasses. "Coach Matthews is pretty selective. The basketball team is like the elite group here. They won regionals last year." Minho felt a flutter of nervousness. "I see. Perhaps he is just being kind to the new student." "Coach Matthews isn't known for kindness," Elijah said with a small laugh. "But hey, if he invited you, you must be good." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other students, including David Campbell and his friends. David shot Minho a look of surprise and something like displeasure before taking his seat at the front of the room. The morning classes proceeded much like the day before, though Minho noticed a subtle shift. Word of his basketball invitation had somehow spread, and the whispers had a different quality now, curiosity rather than dismissal. During religion class, Father Thomas discussed the parable of the Good Samaritan, and Minho felt several eyes turn toward him when the priest emphasized that neighbors could come from unexpected places. "Mr. Park," Father Thomas said, "in your previous studies, did you encounter any similar teachings about helping strangers?" The classroom fell silent. It was the first time a teacher had directly acknowledged Minho's different background in front of the class. "Yes, Father," Minho replied carefully. "In Buddhism, compassion is central. The Buddha taught that all beings deserve kindness, regardless of who they are." Father Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "An excellent point. You see, class, while our faiths may differ in many ways, this ethic of compassion is something we share." "Thank you, Mr. Park." Minho felt a strange mixture of pride and discomfort at being used as an example. As the class ended, he caught David Campbell's eye. The prefect was watching him with an unreadable expression. Lunch was marginally better than the previous day. Though still seated at the international table, Minho found himself included in conversation, primarily about Coach Matthews' infamous training regimen. "He will make you run until you vomit," said Miguel, one of the Hispanic students. "My brother was on the team 2 years ago. Said it was like military training. I played for a very strict coach in Seoul," Minho replied. "I am used to difficult training." "We'll see," said Priya, the Indian girl with a knowing smile. "Coach has broken stronger students than you." The conversation paused as a commotion erupted across the cafeteria. Minho turned to see a teacher, Mr. Solomon, who taught senior literature, stagger slightly and grab the edge of a table to steady himself. The man was in his 60s, with silver hair and a perpetually stern expression. Several students moved to help, but Mr. Solomon waved them off irritably. "I'm perfectly fine," he snapped, loudly enough for the entire cafeteria to hear. "Return to your meals." But Minho noticed how the teacher's hand trembled as he straightened his jacket, how his face had drained of color. There was something wrong, something beyond a momentary dizziness. After school, Minho changed quickly for basketball practice, nervous energy making his movements jerky and uncoordinated. When he entered the gym, several team members were already running drills. They paused briefly to look at him, then resumed without acknowledgement. Coach Matthews emerged from his office, clipboard in hand. "Park, you made it. Start with 3 laps, then join shooting drills with Campbell." Minho nodded and began running, aware of the eyes tracking his progress. By the end of practice, he was drenched in sweat and breathing hard, but he had earned a few grudging nods of approval. He had outshot even David Campbell in the 3-point drills, and his defensive footwork had drawn a rare "not bad" from Coach Matthews. As they filed into the locker room, David fell into step beside Minho. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" he asked, his tone careful, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. "My father taught me when I was 7, Minho replied. "He played semi-professionally in Korea." David nodded slowly. "You're coming to practice Thursday too?" "Yes. Coach Matthews said I should attend all week." "Cool." A pause. "Some of us get pizza after Thursday practice. You should come." It wasn't quite friendship, but it was an opening. Minho showered quickly and headed home, feeling lighter than he had in days. That night, Minho dreamed of the school courtyard transformed into a vast garden. Cherry blossoms and magnolias bloomed alongside crosses and statues of saints. In the center stood his grandfather, prayer beads in hand, talking animatedly with Father Thomas. They were laughing together, each speaking their own language, yet somehow understanding perfectly. When Minho approached, they turned to him in unison. "The mountain has many paths," his grandfather said, "but from the summit the view is the same." Minho woke with the strange sensation that he had been given an important message, though its meaning remained just beyond his grasp. The next day brought a pop quiz in chemistry and a surprise announcement that Mr. Solomon would be taking over religious studies temporarily while Father Thomas attended a conference. This news was met with collective groans from the student body. "Mr. Solomon is like super strict about everything," Elijah explained as they walked to class. "And he's not exactly open-minded about different perspectives." Minho soon discovered the truth of this assessment. Mr. Solomon's approach to religious studies was rigid and dogmatic, focusing exclusively on Catholic doctrine with little room for discussion or questions. When the topic of other world religions arose, Mr. Solomon dismissed them as interesting but fundamentally misguided attempts to understand the divine. Minho kept his head down and took notes, unwilling to draw attention. But Mr. Solomon seemed to notice his discomfort. "Mr. Park," he said, his voice cutting through the classroom silence, "I understand you come from a Buddhist background. Perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on today's topic." Minho felt his heart race. The topic had been salvation through Christ alone. I am still learning about Christian teachings, sir," he said carefully. "In my tradition, we believe there are many paths to enlightenment." Mr. Solomon's mouth tightened. "Indeed. Well, in this classroom, we deal with truth, not relative perspectives. I suggest you pay close attention, Mr. Park. You might learn something valuable." The dismissal was clear, and Minho felt the familiar heat of shame creep up his neck. He noticed David Campbell frowning slightly at the exchange, but the prefect said nothing. After class, as Minho gathered his books, Mr. Solomon approached his desk. "Mr. Park, a word." Minho stood respectfully, though his stomach clenched with anxiety. "Your essay on cultural interpretations of faith was well written," Mr. Solomon said, handing back a paper Minho had submitted to Father Thomas the previous week. "But I would caution you against relativism. Truth is not subjective, regardless of what your previous education may have suggested." "Yes, sir," Minho replied, accepting the paper. A red B was marked at the top, with extensive comments in the margins. "That said," Mr. Solomon continued, his voice lowering slightly, "your analysis of compassion as a universal value was not without merit." He cleared his throat. "That's all, Mr. Park. You may go." As Minho left the classroom, he noticed Mr. Solomon reach for his desk to steady himself, the same slight tremor in his hand that Minho had observed in the cafeteria. But when another student entered with a question, the teacher straightened immediately, all signs of weakness vanishing. During basketball practice that afternoon, Min-ho found himself included more naturally in the team's dynamics. David had introduced him to the others without fanfare. "This is Min-ho, he's joining the team." And that simple acknowledgement had shifted something. They weren't friends yet, but he was no longer invisible. As they ran drills, Min-ho caught sight of Mr. Solomon crossing the courtyard, walking with deliberate slowness, as if each step required concentration. Once again, Min-ho noticed the teacher pause, close his eyes briefly, and take a deep breath before continuing. "Something wrong?" David asked, following Min-ho's gaze. "Mr. Solomon does not look well," Min-ho said quietly. David shrugged. "He's old, been teaching here forever, apparently taught my dad back in the day. Has he always trembled like that?" "Never noticed," David replied, already turning back to practice. "Come on, coach is setting up the scrimmage." That night at dinner, Min-ho mentioned his concerns to his parents. "One of my teachers seems unwell," he said, carefully arranging his rice. "I think perhaps he is having health problems, but he doesn't want anyone to know." His father nodded thoughtfully. "Pride is universal. Many men, especially of the older generation, see admitting weakness as shameful. Should I say something to another teacher?" His mother touched his hand gently. "It's good that you notice these things, Min-ho. Compassion sees what others miss. But be careful not to embarrass him. Perhaps just keep watching, and if it becomes worse, then speak to someone in authority." Min-ho nodded, though the advice didn't fully settle his unease. That night, the prayer beads felt especially smooth as they slipped through his fingers, each bead a reminder of the teaching that all life was interconnected, that the suffering of one was the suffering of all. Thursday's basketball practice ended with Coach Matthews announcing that Min-ho would be joining the team officially, pending paperwork. There was a round of backslaps and nods, and David's invitation to pizza was echoed by several others. For the first time since arriving at St. Augustine's, Min-ho felt a tentative sense of belonging. As they left the gym, the group passed Mr. Solomon, who was supervising detention in the adjacent classroom. The teacher acknowledged them with a curt nod, but said nothing. Min-ho noticed that he was leaning heavily on his desk, and his complexion had a greyish tinge. "Mr. Solomon," Min-ho said, stopping while the others continued ahead. "Are you feeling all right, sir?" The teacher's eyes narrowed. "Perfectly fine, Mr. Park. Your concern is unnecessary." "My grandfather had similar symptoms before his stroke," Min-ho persisted quietly. "Perhaps you should see a doctor." "Your grandfather was not me," Mr. Solomon said sharply, "and I would appreciate if you would refrain from making personal observations about my health. It is inappropriate and presumptuous." Min-ho bowed slightly in apology, though concern still gnawed at him. "I meant no disrespect, sir." "Then demonstrate that by rejoining your friends and leaving me to my work." Min-ho hesitated, then complied, hurrying to catch up with the others. When David questioned his delay, Min-ho merely shrugged and said Mr. Solomon had a question about his essay. The pizza outing was a success. Away from school, his teammates were more relaxed, asking about Korea and basketball and movies. Min-ho found himself laughing genuinely for the first time in weeks. When he mentioned his observation about Mr. Solomon to the group, however, he was met with dismissive chuckles. "Solomon's just a grumpy old man," said Marcus, one of the seniors. "Been that way since freshman year." "Yeah, don't waste your concern on him," added another player. "He gave me detention for being 2 minutes late after my mom was in the hospital." Min-ho nodded and let the subject drop, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Friday morning dawned clear and cool. Min-ho arrived early, as had become his habit, and found Elijah already in the chemistry lab. "There's an assembly today," Elijah informed him as they reviewed notes together. "End-of-month awards and announcements. Mr. Solomon will be presenting the Literature Awards." The assembly was held in the school auditorium after lunch. The entire student body filed in, taking seats by grade level. Min-ho sat with the basketball team, still somewhat surprised to find himself accepted in their circle. David had even saved him a seat. The principal gave a lengthy speech about academic excellence and school spirit, followed by various department heads presenting awards. When it was time for the literature awards, Mr. Solomon took the stage slowly, his movements careful and measured. As he began speaking about the importance of critical analysis in literary studies, Min-ho noticed the same tremor in the teacher's hand as he gripped the podium. Halfway through announcing the sophomore award recipient, Mr. Solomon paused, his face contorting strangely. The microphone amplified his suddenly labored breathing. "The award goes to..." Mr. Solomon's voice faltered. "To..." And then, as if in slow motion, the teacher crumpled, his body folding in on itself as he collapsed on the stage. For a moment, the auditorium was frozen in shocked silence. Then chaos erupted, students half rising from their seats, teachers rushing toward the stage, voices calling for space, for a doctor, for someone to do something. Min-ho was moving before he had consciously decided to act. He pushed past the stunned students, vaulting onto the stage where Mr. Solomon lay motionless, his face ashen. "Call an ambulance!" Min-ho shouted, kneeling beside the fallen teacher. He loosened Mr. Solomon's tie and collar, then checked for a pulse, finding it weak and irregular. "He's having a stroke," Min-ho said to the principal, who had knelt on Mr. Solomon's other side. "We need to turn him on his side and keep his airway clear." Together, they carefully repositioned Mr. Solomon, who remained unconscious but was now breathing more steadily. Min-ho noticed the teacher's face drooping on one side, a classic stroke symptom his grandfather's doctors had taught the family to recognize. "Does he take any medication?" Min-ho asked the principal. I don't know," the man admitted, clearly overwhelmed. "Check his pockets," Min-ho suggested. "He might have pills or a medical ID." The principal found a small pill case in Mr. Solomon's jacket pocket, which they set aside for the paramedics who would surely arrive soon. As they waited, Min-ho kept 2 fingers on Mr. Solomon's pulse, counting silently and monitoring for changes. The teacher's eyelids fluttered, and he made a weak groaning sound. "Mr. Solomon," Min-ho said clearly, leaning close to the man's ear, "you are having a stroke. An ambulance is coming. Try to stay calm and still." Whether the teacher understood or not was unclear, but he seemed to relax slightly at the sound of Min-ho's steady voice. The auditorium had been cleared of students, but Min-ho was vaguely aware of faces watching from the doorways. Concerned, curious, and surprised faces. He recognized David among them, his expression unreadable. When the paramedics arrived, Min-ho quickly relayed his observations. The symptoms he'd noticed over the past days, the exact time of collapse, the changes in pulse and respiration he'd monitored. The lead paramedic nodded approvingly. "Good job, kid. You might have saved his life with that quick action. Time is brain with strokes." As they loaded Mr. Solomon onto a gurney, the teacher's eyes opened briefly. His gaze found Min-ho, and his lips moved in what might have been a thank you, though no sound emerged. After the ambulance departed, the principal placed a hand on Min-ho's shoulder. "That was impressive work, Mr. Park. Where did you learn emergency response?" "When my grandfather had his stroke, the doctors taught our family what to watch for and what to do," Min-ho explained. "In Korea, there is an emphasis on family involvement in medical care." "Well, you showed remarkable presence of mind. I'm sure Mr. Solomon's family will be grateful." The remainder of the day was cancelled. The students sent home early, while the faculty held an emergency meeting. As Min-ho gathered his things from his locker, he found himself surrounded by his basketball teammates and, surprisingly, several other students he barely knew. "That was amazing," Marcus said, echoing the sentiments of the group. "How did you know what to do?" Min-ho explained again about his grandfather, uncomfortable with the attention but touched by the genuine concern in his classmates' faces. "You knew something was wrong with him before today, didn't you?" David asked suddenly. "That's why you were asking about him yesterday?" Min-ho nodded. "I noticed symptoms similar to my grandfather's, but Mr. Solomon did not want to hear my concerns." Classic Solomon, someone muttered, though the usual derision was absent from the comment. David studied Minho thoughtfully. You helped him anyway, even though he shut you down in class about your religion and stuff. Minho shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Of course, he needed help. But why go out of your way for someone who wasn't exactly nice to you? Priya asked, having joined the growing circle around Minho's locker. Minho touched the prayer beads in his pocket, feeling their smooth, familiar contours. In my tradition, we believe that compassion should be given freely, without expectation of return. All beings suffer, and all beings deserve kindness. He paused, searching for words that would bridge the gap between his understanding and theirs. I think, is that not also what Jesus taught? To love your neighbor, even those who are unkind to you? There was a moment of silence as his words sank in. Then David clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture both awkward and genuine. You're all right, Park, he said simply. The following Monday, the school was abuzz with updates on Mr. Solomon's condition. He had indeed suffered a stroke, but thanks to the quick response and early medical intervention, the prognosis was cautiously optimistic. He would need extensive rehabilitation, but the doctors expected a substantial recovery. During morning announcements, the principal commended Minho publicly for his quick action and presence of mind. There was genuine applause, not the perfunctory kind that students usually offered during assemblies. The real change, however, was in the daily interactions. Students who had previously ignored Minho now greeted him in the hallways. His international table at lunch expanded as basketball players and others joined them, creating a diverse mix of backgrounds and interests. In religious studies, now temporarily taught by Ms. Winters, the discussion took an unexpected turn toward comparative religion. In light of recent events, Ms. Winters said, I thought it might be valuable to explore how different faith traditions approach the concept of compassion and duty to others. Mr. Park, would you be willing to share a bit about Buddhist perspectives on this topic? This time, when Minho spoke about interconnectedness and universal compassion, his classmates listened with genuine interest. The discussion that followed was animated and respectful, with students drawing parallels between Buddhist teachings and Christian parables. After class, David approached Minho with an unusual request. Some of us are visiting Solomon in the hospital after school. I thought, maybe you'd want to come. Minho was surprised but touched. Yes, I would like that. The hospital visit was brief, but meaningful. Mr. Solomon was awake but weak, his speech slightly slurred but comprehensible. When he saw Minho among the students, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or a deeper understanding. Mr. Park, he said slowly, each word an effort. You noticed, before anyone. Minho bowed slightly. I recognize the signs from my grandfather's experience. Mr. Solomon nodded laboriously. I should have listened. You will have time to listen now, Minho replied gently. Focus on your recovery. As they left the hospital room, Mr. Solomon called Minho back. Your essay, the teacher said, about compassion. I'm changing the grade. A+. Minho smiled. Thank you, sir, but that is not necessary. Not for you, Mr. Solomon said, a hint of his old severity returning. For me, to remember. 2 weeks later, the school held an interfaith dialogue event, the first in St. Augustine's history. The idea had emerged organically from discussions in Ms. Winter's class, with students expressing interest in learning more about different religious traditions. Minho found himself on a panel alongside Priya, who spoke about Hinduism, and a Lebanese student named Ziad, who shared Muslim perspectives. The auditorium was full, with parents and community members joining the student body. Father Thomas, returned from his conference, moderated the discussion with genuine curiosity and respect. When Minho explained the Buddhist concept of bodhicitta, the awakened heart committed to alleviating suffering in all beings, Father Thomas drew thoughtful parallels to Christ's commandment to love one's neighbor. What strikes me, Father Thomas said, is how these diverse traditions, emerging from different cultures and historical contexts, arrive at similar ethical conclusions. The particulars of theology may differ, but the call to compassion resonates across boundaries. After the event, as students and parents mingled over refreshments, Minho found himself surrounded by his basketball teammates, international friends, and classmates from various grades. David stood beside him, now a friend rather than merely a teammate. "My dad wants to meet you," David said, guiding Minho toward a tall man in a business suit. "He's on the school board. I think your interfaith thing gave him ideas." Mr. Campbell shook Minho's hand firmly. "Impressive panel tonight, young man. David's told me about your quick thinking with Mr. Solomon as well. We've been discussing ways to make St. Augustine's more inclusive while maintaining our Catholic identity. I'd be interested in your thoughts." As Minho engaged in conversation with Mr. Campbell, he caught sight of his parents across the room, speaking animatedly with Father Thomas. His mother caught his eye and gave him a subtle nod of approval. Minho felt a warmth spread through his chest, not the heat of embarrassment that had become so familiar, but something lighter, more buoyant. Later that evening, as Minho prepared for bed, he took out his prayer beads and ran them through his fingers, their familiar weight comforting. He thought of his grandfather's words about different paths leading to the same mountain peak, and of Father Thomas's reflection on compassion transcending boundaries. The beads, once a private reminder of his difference, now felt like a bridge, a physical embodiment of the connections being forged between traditions, between people who had once seemed irreconcilably separate. Minho closed his eyes and began his evening meditation, each breath a prayer of gratitude for unexpected belonging, for lessons learned in adversity, and for the universal truth that had guided him from the beginning, that compassion, freely given, could transform not only the recipient, but the giver and all who witnessed it. In the quiet of his room, the jade beads clicked softly together, their sound mingling with the distant church bells of St. Augustine's, different notes combining in unexpected harmony.